So, something that I found really interesting for my Cold War assignment was the effect on the American education system. Because, as we know, the Cold War was following two prior wars, and that's why America did not want to get into direct conflict with the Soviet Union. And as a result, just wanted to be like this giant contest of being like, I'm better. So, something that they were clearly not better at and still aren't better is student test scores. So, it was estimated even then that the average American student was 2 years behind in math and 2 years behind in English. And as a result, that inspired a public school reform, so that they could keep up with the Soviets. Part of that meant teaching children about the new space race and things like that. However, it was told that in Soviet countries, as can be expected, communism was something that was being instilled in children from a very young age, and as such made them support their government. And though publicly America denied, like, obviously went against this because, communism is evil. That's not the most eloquent way to say it, but we all know that that's what they were thinking. But at the same time that they were condemning this method of, exposing volatile minds to something evil, there was a campaign, an anti-communist campaign that America ran, where they had the slogan, "They want your child." You know, incredible. But at the same time, they decided to teach an anti-communist curriculum where they spoke of communist ideology, how it was evil, and how there was nuclear armament. So in some ways, America was doing the same thing that the Soviet Union was doing, but in reverse. They had textbooks with films, and the FDA talked about the branches of military. So it was called a seductive form of propaganda, where men, and I guess women, but this was mostly aimed at men, to inspire them to join the force of America, join the army. So the US Army had, on some of their textbooks, which I thought was so interesting, this picture of Adolf Hitler stating the great masses will more easily fall victims to a big lie than a small one. And, you know, this was something that was presented as anti-communist in America, but in the Soviet Union, the children were supposedly taught lies by Hitler and Stalin, or at least that's what Americans were told. There's a lot of this source, especially where I'm getting a lot of my information, is an American source, but I believe that they were very much against this practice. Well, the goal was to instill these children with the deep fear of communism. They were shown PSAs in movies. Hollywood made notable contributions to educational films. The Warner Brothers released Red Nightmare. It starred some respected actors and talked about how the lack of American freedoms could be found in a communist environment. And, it was a fear of communist expansion. So, the government used media to influence American culture to achieve military goals. Something that I find incredibly dystopian, along with the fact that they were targeting children, though, yes, I think as a society we can agree that the form of communism that is present in the Soviet Union was not an ideal form, taking it to the extreme of making children fear communism so that they would join the military in their older years. I don't know. I don't know if we should be supporting that, but we all know America's made some questionable decisions in the past. But more interestingly, there was these instructional films to reinforce the possibility of nuclear annihilation and, offer methods of survival. And part of what I find so dystopian about that is since they were targeted towards young-ish children, they had animation with shots of real children and a simplistic overview of what to do if an atomic bomb lands nearby. There was this film that is called A is for Atom. This film, talked about atoms and what happens when they're split, and the destruction that would come if that were to be unleashed on America's children. So the United States wanted to ensure that their youth were physically prepared in case of a war with the Soviets commenced. So there was a push for an increase in school-based physical education. Oh man, all of these, so it was said by many of the officials that were pushing for public school reform that it was not necessarily to target children or to make them, more willing to fight in a war or more physically able to fight in a war, even though that was what they were doing. They just said that public schools are the center of a community, and if we instill those values in a public school, then, their parents will want to go to war. Though they were blatantly still targeting school children. But it was said that part of what came with the advancements of society, we know there's great differences from the 18th century to the 19th century, and there's great differences from the 19th to the 20th century. And as a result, children were falling behind when it came to preparedness of school across the board. They said that they had too little attention, they were living too easygoing lives, and it said that there was a test just to see how far behind they were. Children 6 to 19 living in suburban communities, 4,000 were American, 3,000 were European, and about 60% of children failed to meet a minimum standard of physical agility required for health. So, they were fitness tests instilled at school. Now, it's said that that was only for American children. The statistic was 60% were not physically fit compared to only 9% of Europeans that were deemed unphysically fit by these testing. So, they basically structured the PE program to have those tests. I'm sure that all of us have gone through it, where we have physical fitness exams. It's it's such a wild concept to me that something that is so normalized to us as like a PE system with standardized testing for health is something that originated because the American government wanted fitter soldiers. And it was said that more and more were unhealthy and unable to meet the draft boards. When Korean War era came, it was said that 51% were able to pass their physical test in 1951. Then by 1960, that number hit 38% they were able to pass. So a decline in the amount of people fit for the American military would not be so good if they actually had to go against the Soviet Union. John F. Kennedy published an article in Sports Illustrated. It was called The Soft American, where he said the vigor of our citizens is one of our most valuable resources, and if we allow it to dwindle and grow soft, then we will destroy much of our ability to meet the great and vital challenges which confront our people. We will be unable to realize our full potential as a nation. He said that it is a necessity for soldiers to have bodies which have been conditioned by a lifetime of participation in sports and interest in physical activity. He said, in an immediate sense, our growing softness, our increasing lack of physical fitness is a menace to society. He recognized President Eisenhower's efforts and said, this is a national problem. President Eisenhower showed us this problem, now it's time to fix it. So Kennedy himself put in a plan to help the United States, the physical help of the United States. So there was accountability for physical fitness in the hands of the Department of Health. There was a partnership between the Secretary of Health, Education, Welfare, and the Secretary of the Interior to address physical fitness. And there was also some research, to help stop this as associated with that. But the third step required governors of every state to attend an annual meeting on physical fitness, to review the progress of local citizens in physical activity over the prior year, and talk about opportunities for improvement in the coming year. But honestly, not all was lost with this kind of alarming reform of public school system, because the civil rights movement of 1960 dramatically transformed Cold War messages of racial harmony to an awareness of racial inequalities. The Black Power movement, which we all know was very prevalent in that era, pushed school boards to approve the teaching of Black history and culture. Colleges were pressured to recruit Black teachers and Black students, Afro-American cultural centers, and instituted Black studies into departments. So just to sum up, this was a time of radical change. We all know the baby boomers and how they resulted in a huge amount of young adults in the country. All those young adults who were condensed to colleges where they were taught about the reality of their system. So that caused a lot of protests, especially in California and Berkeley. There's some quite famous ones that were against the teaching of propaganda and educational policies in elementary and secondary school, which, wow, what a radical ideology. But it was truly revolutionary for the time period. I think, to sum up, the initial acceptance of ideological management was seen as a commitment to prepare the nation during a time of war, because obviously they were threatened by the USSR. But this practice of incorporating propaganda into education is part of the reason why these generations were so malinformed about the reality of American history. It's said that it caused numerous misinterpretations of history, current affairs, national policies for an entire generation of students. Even when journalists, educational professionals, or the public, the Cold War overshadowed anything that they could say against it. So these children were grown up around America's best propaganda. And schools were essentially factories for soldiers. And a lot of that still remains in our education system. But something that I would like to explore is how much of an impact it had on that generation, the baby boomers, to be exposed to a number of propaganda in a school system that's intentionally impartial. Okay, I think that's all. Hopefully I haven't bored you yet. Bye, Mr. Callahan.